Welcome, Donald. Thank you for joining us and taking the time to take part in this event today. We're just waiting for one more of the candidates to arrive, and then we'll get started and we'll get admit people and get started. That's us. There we go. Welcome, Alison. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you're feeling okay.
Yeah, I may just have to move occasionally, but probably
that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, you feel free to do that, and I hope you're not in too much pain.
I know. Yeah, just an unfortunate accident.
Yeah.
I'm hoping to go and have it operated on tomorrow. So
right. Oh dear.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. It's a big ask to take part in this when you're feeling so sore.
Well, I think it keeps me occupied and it's important, so it's good to have something to do.
Very much appreciate it. So I'm going to start admitting the participants now, and then I'll do a welcome, and then we can get started.
There we go. Yeah. And the other speaker.
Yeah.
That's us. Right. Going to just start by welcoming everyone to the Carers Hustings. Can I just ask if you're, can you check that you're muted? And if you're not, can you mute, please? It might also help if you're not one of the candidates, if you're able to switch your camera off, and that's just to make sure that we can keep the stream stable, so that we don't have any problems in terms of breaking up of sound or vision. That'd be really helpful. Thank you very much. So welcome everyone to this Carers Hustings, which the National Care Organisations have organised in partnership with Oxfam Scotland. We're so pleased that so many of you have been able to attend. We know you've got so many demands on your time, and we really appreciate it. I'm just going to run through a few bits of housekeeping on how the event will run. First of all, we're recording the event. I'm hoping that we are recording it, so that we can share it with other carers online. If you don't wish to be on the screen, you can put your camera off, and we'd ask that unless you're asking a question, that keep your microphone muted. We'll start with the candidates speaking for no more than 3 minutes about their party's plans to support carers in the next parliamentary term. And then it's your opportunity to ask questions. My colleague Clare from the Coalition will be bringing in the questions. We've got a couple already submitted, but if I can ask you if you can put your questions in the chat along with your name and where you live, and we'll endeavour to bring you in. At this point, if you don't want to be on camera, if you just say that you don't want to be, and Claire can ask it on your behalf, and we'll try and get through as many as possible. Once we've completed the questions, each of the candidates will have 2 minutes to finish up telling us about what they will do to be advocates for carers in the next parliamentary term. and we'll be live tweeting the event using the hashtag Carers Votes Counts. So please feel free to share your thoughts on Twitter. So just an introduction, we know that caring's really tough even in the best of times, but it's been a really challenging year for the growing number of carers in Scotland caring for someone during the pandemic. There are now more than 1 million carers in Scotland, saving over £13 billion. Your contribution is and has been staggering. We've developed a manifesto to bring in the many views and experiences of carers and young carers, and we're working to encourage parties across Scotland to bring commitments that will make a real difference to carers' lives and ensure that your needs are front and centre in the recovery from the pandemic. So enough for me, let's begin. First of all, I just want to quickly introduce you to the candidates. We have Clare Adamson from the Scottish National Party, Donald Cameron from the Scottish Conservatives, Catriona Bhatia from the Scottish Liberal Democrats, Mark Griffin from Scottish Labour, and Alison Johnstone from the Scottish Green Party. So I'm going to give the introductory 3 minutes. So what I'll do is I'll put my hand up with 30 seconds to go, and we will mute you after 3 minutes, so we're going to be quite strict. So I'd like to turn over to the candidates and bring in Clare Adamson for her 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm hoping not to take my full 3 minutes because I really want to hear the questions from the carers on the call today. I guess the first thing is to thank everyone for the work that they are doing in caring for loved ones, and hope that you understand that we recognise how vitally important the work you do is and will be going forward. I myself have become a carer since just before the start of COVID, an elderly parent, and I've experienced some of the challenges that you will all have experienced as well. That being said, we know how hard it is to be a carer financially, how hard it can be in terms of your life opportunities and the ability to study and all of these issues. And we know that those inequalities that carers experience, whether they're young carers going through school or in college or university, to right through to people who are perhaps themselves experiencing challenges of growing old or experience ill health themselves, that these things become really, really challenging, and COVID has only made that worse. If I could just leave you with some of the things that an SNP government has committed to doing if re-elected, and then I'm really keen to hear your questions. So they will introduce an improved carers payment to replace the carers allowance, and will pay anyone looking after a disabled person an extra £10 per week. We know that's never going to be enough, but it's a step in the right direction. We recognise the burden of the pandemic, and because of that, they will commit to making another double payment of carers allowance supplement for this year coming. And also, just to re-emphasise the work that has been done in supporting unpaid carers through the pandemic and before, the key to that has been the establishment of the Carers Act and enshrining the rights of carers, and a duty on local authorities to recognise and support carers when they're seeking advice. And I'll leave it there and look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clare. And I'd like to bring in Donald now.
Thank you, Fiona, and I will try and be as brief as Clare was. Firstly, I should also say thank you to Scotland's national care organisations, as well as Oxfam Scotland, for organising this event and for all the work that these fantastic charities do. I've had the support of all of these organisations over many years, and also their contribution to the Health Committee, which I sat on in the Scottish Parliament just until recently. Now, although this may sound like a cliche, it is true to say that this is one of the most important elections we've faced. And that's really because of the recent experience of the pandemic, which has highlighted, in my view, a lot of the issues that exist within care services that many, not only those in the third sector, but many carers have been telling politicians about for years, but have seen little action being taken so far. And in some ways, the pandemic is a crisis upon a crisis. And secondly, of course, the election is an opportunity to choose the next government and to shape future policies for the next 5 years and beyond that. I'm particularly keen on hearing people's experience about juggling work with their caring responsibilities, also to listen to any young carers that we have on this call and to take their questions, because I think it's they're particularly of a focus for us. In terms of policies, we understand as a party the importance of getting respite services up and running again so we can assist those who've been under extreme pressure during the pandemic. And although I'm not a carer, I do have a disabled parent, and I do undertake some caring responsibilities for him. So I have some idea, although nothing like as much as many people on this call will have, about what you've gone through during the last 12 months. I think we've also got to look at improvements to the carers allowance. And as I said earlier, we recognise the importance of allowing carers to both work and care at the same time, if possible, and if they want to. And I think there's a lot of work that we can do around dedicated employability services to support those who have had to give up work to then return to work when they're able to. So just to wrap up, we value the work that every carer does. We appreciate the sacrifices that many of you, all of you have made, and the sacrifices that come with the responsibilities of caring for a vulnerable relative or a friend. And we're committed to delivering for our carers and look forward to taking your questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to bring in Catriona.
Thank you very much, Fiona, and many thanks for inviting me to the Carers Hustings today. I think it's important to recognise that people who care for others, whether that's paid or unpaid, whether they're young or old, they're doing a remarkable and important job. And as you said, there are now around 1.1 million people in Scotland who are looking after someone else, and that includes almost 30,000 young carers. It can mean sacrificing your own well-being and financial security to meet the needs of those that you care for, and that has been clearer than ever during the pandemic. Thousands have had to step up to look after their loved ones, and that doesn't mean that carers don't get tired or need time to themselves, and they deserve proper support that puts the human rights of carers and those that they care for at their core. With the brutal combination of lockdowns, shielding requirements, and reduced support services, the last year has been incredibly tough. Most carers are just exhausted. Most haven't had a single break since the pandemic started. So I think we need to do whatever it takes to secure regular breaks and respite. We've got a plan to help education bounce back because for young carers, balancing the pressures have been really tough. It needs to be easier to access education and training at any stage of life, and it all needs to fit around you. It's been hard for young people to balance education with looking after loved ones, especially during the pandemic. And our education bounce back plan is designed to make every hour spent in learning in school count for more. And it recognises that social and emotional development is just as important as and essential to academic development. Our UK leader, Ed Davey, is a carer, and he's been a carer for much of his life. And he has launched our nationwide Stand Up for Carers campaign. And that includes an immediate UK-wide uplift to the carers allowance of £1,000 a year. And we also support a universal basic income, which would assist unpaid carers. Increasing financial support is vital, but being a carer can impact significantly in many other ways. It takes time, energy, and can leave you feeling isolated. The Scottish Health Survey analysis of mental wellbeing amongst carers showed that mental wellbeing decreases as hours of care increase, and there's a clear link there. So we have to put recovery first for our mental health services. And we need to ensure that there's vital support through respite. We need to make sure there's sufficient and reliable opportunities for respite, a break from caring, and knowing that your loved ones are safe and cared for. Might be needed to recharge batteries or spend time doing other things that are important to you. So there should be guarantees of respite that you can actually rely on. And Willie Rennie has fought month after month to secure safe visiting and access to loved ones in care homes. It took a lot of pressure to bring families back together, but that's finally happening. And after all that separation, quality time with loved ones is so precious. So the Scottish Liberal Democrats will lead the way to a more caring society as we emerge from the pandemic, and we should be approaching caring with a fresh sense of urgency. So we can't afford to have a government that is distracted, and we will make sure that we put recovery first and support carers and those that they care for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone so far who's kept to time. And I'd like to bring in Mark now.
Thanks, Fiona, and thanks everyone on the call for all the tremendously valuable and hard work that you do. Just say sorry in advance for any interruptions. It's the Easter holidays and there are 3 kids under 5 here, so apologies in advance for any unplanned interruptions. But Scottish Labour really value the work that unpaid carers do, and we'll be setting out plans in our manifesto next week for how we would support unpaid carers. But perhaps I could just go through some of that. We would introduce a comprehensive strategy for unpaid carers, which would include increased investment, entitlement to respite breaks, access to leisure and wellbeing services, occupational health support, and access to independent advocacy services. And we would also set out that all organisations receiving public funding would have to become carer positive employers. And we would also work with carers and the people that they care for to reform the carers allowance, because so few people are actually entitled to it. And we would extend eligibility to Scottish Carers Assistance to make sure that that's available to all unpaid carers who care for 20 hours or more each week. And we would also look at the earnings threshold that rule out a lot of people too. We would look at including aligning it to, at a minimum, 16 hours of work at the real living wage to allow more carers to work and earn more from part-time. We'd also remove the cliff edge that means that people lose all carers allowance if they go 1 pence over that earnings threshold, and remove the full-time study rule. So that meant that people could be full-time students and still be eligible for carers allowance, and address the overlapping benefit rule that I know disadvantages some carers on the state pension. What we'd also do is we plan on introducing a human rights-based carers bereavement support bill in the next Parliament, and that would mean that when someone comes to the end of their caring role, that we put in place a fund to support training and education, and that the carers allowance and carers allowance supplement would be extended from 8 weeks to 6 months with a new post-caring support payment. And you can hear that doorbell frantically going as one of my girls' friends is there waiting for her to come out to play. But I'll stop there and just be happy to take questions.
But thank you very much, Mark. The joys of working at home and the interruptions that come when you least expect it. So at this point, I'd like to turn to questions from yourselves. If you can please continue to add questions along with your name and where you live in the chat. I'm going to bring in Clare Cairns. I think she's going to appear on the screen any minute. And she's going to be bringing in and asking the questions. If you want to ask a question yourself, if you can say that in your question. If you don't want to, then that's fine. Claire can ask them. So Claire, I'll hand over to you for the first question, please.
Thanks, Fiona. The first question I'm going to ask is one that was given by a carer in advance, but has also appeared in the chat. So it is, the review of adult social care recommended that carers have the right to respite. Do you support this recommendation, and how would you intend to implement it? And also Fiona Culbert in the chat has said, which party is actually going to make respite a right and ensure that it is not chargeable? Indeed, who is going to remove the brutal eligibility criteria that makes carers reach crisis to get support to meet the threshold substantial and critical?
Thank you very much, Claire. So if I can bring in this question, if I can bring in Donald first.
Thanks for the question. And as I touched on earlier, respite is critically important, particularly in the wake of the pandemic. And what we believe is that the priority has to get them up and running again as soon as we can, as soon as it's safe, and as soon as possible. Because over the last 12 months, as I think we've all said, carers have had to sacrifice so much and have been under intense intense pressure. So I think the most important thing is to get them reopened, and get them up and running, as I say, so that they can support people who need help now, who need respite now. Beyond that, there's definitely an argument for existing carers legislation to be fully implemented and fully funded, and that services for unpaid carers, such as respite, are properly supported and joined up as well, because I think a lot of carers are falling through the cracks of provision at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you. And if I can bring in Catriona now.
Thank you very much, Fiona, and many thanks for the question. Yeah, I think respite is absolutely essential, and we would support the recommendations in the Feely review. I think what we would need to make sure is that there's capacity there, and that's where particularly the third sector is very helpful in terms of making sure that people can actually access the respite as and when they need it. So, that can be anything from a residential respite, which obviously takes a lot more organising, to just an hour's respite during the day, so that somebody can get out the house and get the shopping, knowing that the person they need to care for is also being cared for. So we need to make sure we build up the capacity in order that we can give everybody the entitlement that they need in order to carry out their caring duties, in a way which protects their human rights and also protects their mental health. So all of these things are interlinked, but yes, we would support a right to respite for carers.
Thank you very much. And I can bring in Mark now.
Thanks, Fiona. Yeah, we would absolutely support a right to respite, and I think it's got to be flexible. It's got to suit the carer, and we are considering whether that's possible to give, say, regular weekly sessions, whether that's one afternoon a week, just to give carers time to...
You're not meant to put your video on. Yeah.
Or to undertake skills training or education, or whether that's a longer, more substantial period of respite that's required. So really committing absolutely to a right to respite, but making sure that it's flexible enough that it suits the carer and cared for person.
And if I can bring in Clare now.
Thank you very much. We absolutely recognise that respite is a real issue for carers and young carers alike, and that we have to support people throughout the pandemic and beyond in terms of the impact where respite hasn't been available as well as it could be. But the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport wrote to the sector in January just to confirm that adult day services can continue to provide essential support, particularly with the mental health of the carers is at risk. So we've done a bit towards opening up those services again. We've also been working with partners to ensure carers have access to short breaks that are suitable for those who are self-isolating and physically distancing, and that was a £3 million short breaks fund that was established. There's also, we have invested £1.1 million in the short breaks fund and £300,000 in our Young Scot Carer package in this financial year, and that's to support carers of all ages to enjoy some time and some respite. So this absolutely involves the third sector as well, and we continue to support the third sector who offer respite services, whether residential or not. And in the issue of rights, I think this is really important. I was convener of the Social Security Committee when we put through the Social Security Bill, and we wanted to enshrine people's expectation to have dignity and respect at all times. So in the face of that bill, it was one of the first time we'd done it. And we're also, as we look towards establishing a national care service, human rights will be at the focus of that. It will be about a rights-based approach to a national care service. So I think we've come some way. There's been some steps along the way in terms of the Carers Act, which established rights and responsibilities in local authorities as well. So I think very much this will be key to developing the new service as we go forward and keeping the rights of carers firmly at the centre of what we're doing.
Thank you very much, Claire. I'm going to give Alison a chance to respond to that question, but also to bring in her 3 minutes. And I apologise sincerely. I was so anxious to get to questions. I hadn't ticked my list properly. So I'll bring you in now, Alison.
That's fine, Fiona. I think Mark's doorbell antics had a bit to do with that. I think we all got sucked into Mark's home life there for a few minutes. Yeah, so on behalf of the Scottish Green Party, I'm really pleased to be taking part in this afternoon's interesting discussion. I think the pandemic has highlighted that our care system generally is in crisis and requires a radical overhaul. And obviously the field of view has been looking at one aspect of care, but I think it's really important that we're having this discussion today when we consider that 1.1 million people in Scotland are carers and that they are providing £13 billion worth of care. And I think if we look at that just sensibly, imagine if those carers were unable to provide that care. What would happen? Well, society would ground to a halt, let's be serious, and the costs would be astronomical. So we shouldn't look at that £13 billion as some financial burden. We should look at it as an investment in people looking after their loved ones, their friends and family, and we should enable them to do so in a way that provides them with a decent quality of life. I think in my own family, we first realised that someone was a carer when that person got to breaking point and required respite. And only at that point, did they have a very good look at what was available. And when they did that, it transformed the situation. But I can see from the very good chat that's going on in the chat box there that many people have experienced similar. And that is to do with the fact that we don't often recognise who carers are. So we need to make sure that we are carer aware as a society. I wholly appreciate Mark's commitment to a carer positive employment. That is absolutely something we should be focusing on in this session of Parliament, but just being carer aware so that teachers are aware why a young person might be turning up 10 minutes late every day. They're not doing it to be annoying or because they can't get out of bed. They're probably doing it for very good reasons indeed. And just generally in society, having a bit more compassion and understanding for those who are making life possible for the rest of us. There are many, our manifesto will be published in coming days, but we want to make sure that all devolved benefits rise annually in line with living costs. We want a review of carers' assistance. We want to consider a lower caring hours threshold, and we want a more flexible earnings limit. We want to see the carers allowance increased, and we want to examine providing extra payment to those who care for more than one person. And we'd like to introduce a carers recognition payment for those who are not eligible for existing carers assistance because of overlapping benefits. And we want to ensure that sibling carers and young people who care jointly for more than one person, or they care jointly for a person, are all recognised. I think in this session of Parliament, I'm very pleased that our manifesto commitment to a Young Carers Grant was picked up quickly by the Scottish Government. That's been implemented. It's currently just over £300. We would like to see that doubled to £600, and that comes after discussion with young carers. So I think those are some of the policies we'd like to bring forward, and I hope I've not gone over time, and I very much look forward to the ongoing discussion. Just one more thing I would say, we've had since I've been involved in the party for 3 decades or so, a commitment to universal basic income, and I think that would be transformative in enabling everyone with caring duties to have a bit more financial assistance and a bit more security.
Thank you very much, Alison. So with that, I'd like to bring Clare back to bring in a second question.
Hi there. Yes, the second question, we're going to bring in a carer who is a participant, and that is Cara Skugel, who's going to ask a question about support for children with a disability, particularly in terms of breakfast clubs and other forms. Cara, do you want to come in and ask your question?
Hi there, thank you for that. So my question would be, my husband and I work full time. My son's only 2 at the minute, but obviously the whole experience since he's been born has been very stressful. It's a completely unknown world to us. And we've got a 6-year-old who attends breakfast club and things. Our parents are elderly and still work full time. So the questions I have is obviously, do kids still have the same opportunities who have disabilities? My daughter goes to a breakfast club. As far as I'm led to believe, that isn't possible at the minute. So is that something that's going to be looked at and changed so that kids with disabilities have the same opportunities? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And can I bring in Catriona first?
Thank you very much, and many thanks for your question, Cara. It's, I mean, every child should have the right to access the same opportunities, no matter whether they're disabled or whether they're able-bodied. It should make no difference whatsoever. And certainly we have a lot more modern schools now which have much better accessibility, and there's been an inclusion policy in terms of education for at least the last 2 decades since the Scottish Parliament was established. So the Scottish Liberal Democrats certainly want to bring in breakfast clubs for all children, and that would include your daughter to be able to access the same breakfast club that, you know, any other child will be able to do. I mean, clearly within education, we need to make sure that those young carers are given sufficient support, and that may well be by employing additional teaching assistants, ensuring that they have catch-up sessions, and also offering them opportunities like, for example, a week's outdoor residential experience, and that should be for every child, again, whether they're disabled or able-bodied. And in particular, we need to ensure that young carers have this pastoral support in school, and that the teachers are aware of who the young carers are, and that they're offered any additional support, and they're not penalised, you know, if they have to be late to school because of their caring duties, or if they have to take time off school. So it's a whole package around young carers that we need to establish, but it shouldn't preclude any child from accessing education and all the support services around education that are on offer.
Thank you, Catriona. Could I bring in Mark now?
Thanks, Fiona. I mean, I think if there's a breakfast club running and your child will be attending that school, and the school were to say your child cannot attend that breakfast club because of their disability, that is completely unacceptable and probably illegal. And so I would be challenging that immediately. That we already have legislation in place that protects everyone's rights, and it would be entirely unacceptable for a school to run a breakfast club which was simply open to some of the pupils that attended that school. So I completely support your point, and you know, if that is the case, I would encourage you to get in touch with your own counsellor or MSP to take that up on your behalf. But the Scottish Labour Party are committed to free school meals for all primary school children in this election, and including rolling out what we have here in North Lanarkshire, which is a holiday hunger Club 365, where school meals and school clubs are provided through Easter, October, summer holidays, and everyone would have a right to attend those.
Thank you, Mark. And can I bring in Alison now?
Yes, thank you. You know, I agree with Mark. It would be wholly discriminatory and, you know, very dubious and just simply wrong practice to exclude a child from a breakfast club on grounds of disability, one that we would all wish to challenge immediately. I mean, my own party wants to see the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Disabled People incorporated into Scots law, so that we're better able to challenge any practice that isn't wholly inclusive. You know, we know if children are hungry, you know, they will not attain to their optimal at school, and we're aware too of the disability employment gap. Now so it means it's incredibly important that they get to enjoy a whole full day at school In our latest budget negotiations with the Scottish Government, the Scottish Greens have secured the rollout of free school meals to all primary school age children. That will be phased in. And also to ensure that those who most need help during the holiday periods, which is a period when we can often forget, families don't suddenly increase their income just because school isn't on, that support will be available then. But I'm very concerned by your question, and certainly we need to make sure that this isn't occurring as a result of a disability.
Thank you very much. Can I bring in Clare, please? We're having a slight technical problem in terms of you being spotlighted, but we'll get you back in the spotlight shortly.
Okay, I did. So I did get bumped out of the meeting there, so apologies if I'm repeating something that's already been said, but I'm back in now. And I just want to echo what's been said about the rights of the child and human rights being absolutely key to this. And we've just passed legislation to incorporate UNCRC, supported unanimously across the chamber. One of the, I think, most important bits of legislation we have seen in the Parliament in the last session, and that should ensure that no one is discriminated against if services are being offered. So it would be absolutely untenable for a young person to be excluded from facilities and from support that's there just because they are disabled or there are additional challenges for them. So the SNP have committed to free lunch and breakfast clubs all year round, and I think that's so important because they did fund lunch clubs all the way through the COVID period, and it's been identified as being so important. But making it a universal right removes a lot of the stigma from young people that would be participating in them. It then becomes not about it's a holiday club available to everyone. And I think that's really, really important, because that's what we hear from young disabled people, but also from young carers themselves, is that they feel a great stigma around the challenges that they have in life. And I think that the fact that that will be a universal service should open that up and remove that stigma for them, which I think is the way we should be going forward.
Thank you very much, Claire. And can I bring in Donald now?
Thanks for that. Cara, in terms of your question, I mean, a long time ago, I used to be a lawyer specializing in discrimination law. And I can tell you that from what you've said, it would be unlawful for any school, any provider of a service such as this to discriminate against someone on the basis of a disability. And as Mark and I think Alison and others have said, this it's completely unacceptable. It's also unlawful. So that I'm very disturbed to hear that, and you would have every cause to complain to the provider of the service as a result. I mean, the other point to make, I think, quickly is that back in September, we as a party pledged free school meals to all primary pupils for breakfast and lunch. It's for very good reasons. It's a really important thing to try and achieve for people, especially in deprived communities. So we fully support that, and I just hope that you can resolve the situation that you've spoken about as quickly as possible, because it is completely indefensible. Thanks.
Thank you, Donald. So at this point, I'll bring Claire Cairns back in to ask the third question.
Hi, now if you've been reading the chat, you'll see that there's been an awful lot of comments and questions around Carers Alliance and financial support for carers. So I'm just going to try and bring a few of these together. So Helen McAleer is asking about pensioners who are carers, who's going to commit to acknowledging by expanding Carers Alliance for this group. And we also have Jim Guyan asking, Carers Alliance only assists approximately 10% of carers. What plans have you to support the other 90%? And a question we had in advance from the Managers Network is, during the pandemic, carers had to do more, care for longer hours and with less support. As Derek Feely, chair of the Independent Review of Adult Social Care, stated, without unpaid carers, social care would collapse. With that in mind, if elected, will your party recognise carers and support them by reviewing the amount of money they receive from Carers Alliance, which works out at £1.92 a week? and that figure's been given because carers have to care for at least 35 hours a week. So really a few questions there. What will your party do to support carers who aren't eligible for carers allowance, and will you raise the amount of money carers receive?
That's great, thank you very much, Claire. And can I bring in Mark first?
Yeah, thanks for all those questions. I think I said at the beginning some of the things that we would do. First off, address the overlapping benefit rule that disadvantages carers on the state pension. So immediately look at addressing that. But the reason that there are so few carers entitled to carers allowance is because of all the rules that go along with it. And as I said at the start, we would reduce the number of hours that someone would need to declare that they were caring for to 20 hours rather than 35, which would hopefully boost the entitlement. We would change the earnings threshold so that the earnings threshold was at least 16 hours on the real living wage. We wouldn't make it a cut-off where if you earned 1 penny more than the threshold, you would lose all of your carers allowance. And we would introduce a taper and also look at the amount carers received as a whole. And should also say that as a member of the Scottish Parliament, I successfully moved amendments to make sure that carers allowance supplement was uprated by inflation every year. So we've already got a record of making sure that payments aren't just introduced at a flat rate and stay there forever, that they are supposed to track that increases in the cost of living, but we will set out really comprehensive plans for reforming carers allowance to increase the value and increase the eligibility.
Thank you very much, Mark. And can I bring in Alison, please?
Yeah, thank you. I think one thing that I find in all the hustings I've been taking part in, certainly there have been a few on caring and health and so on, is there's a lot of consensus amongst colleagues from different parties. I think we are all frustrated by the lack of recognition that carers receive, and it's incumbent upon us to change that. And I do believe there's greater focus than there has ever been on that caring role, and there will be in the next session, because the pandemic has just, it's put this issue into stark relief. We're wholly dependent on the work that you do. And you're right, the hourly payment, if we look at a 35-hour week, I mean, frankly, it's insulting. So we do have to do something about that. With regards to not being eligible because you're in receipt of a pension, we need to look at that. In our manifesto, we have a commitment to a carers recognition payment, which takes into account the fact that you're being excluded. Obviously, there are issues here because some of this is reserved and some of it is devolved, but I think there's general consensus on this panel that what we're doing isn't enough currently to support carers adequately. And the last thing we want you doing is, just feeling wholly overwhelmed and unable to carry on, because what will that achieve? I mean, just nothing but an increasingly negative outcome. So I think we do need to look at eligibility. Who set this 35-hour per week limit? You could be absolutely exhausted caring for someone for 20 hours a week, and that's not recognised. You could be caring for 2 people for 15 hours a week. There are all sorts. We just need to have a flexible system that actually responds, that pays people by the hour for however many hours they're doing. But I think a national conversation is required on this, as has happened with the National Care Review. I'm pleased that the discussion has taken part this afternoon, and there generally seems to be agreement that we need to do much more, but we need to make sure that folk don't fall off a cliff because of an arbitrary earnings limit that's been set. And yeah, I think we need to make sure that the discussion that needs to happen around caring really does take place in the next Parliament. We've seen a lot of focus on health and social care in recent weeks and months. I don't think as yet we've seen enough focus on unpaid care and the fact that people are expected to survive on, an income that is wholly inadequate. No one would be applying for this job if it was advertised in a paper, yet people are stepping up to the mark and reducing Well, it's affecting all sorts of employment opportunities and activities that families might normally wish to take part in. But I have real sympathy for your question. It simply isn't good enough, and I will commit with my party to make sure there's a proper focus on this.
Thank you very much, Alison. And can I bring in Clare now?
Thank you. I just like to reflect and echo the comments about consensus amongst the panel today. And I know from working with Mark and Alison in the Social Security Bill when it was passed in this session of the Parliament, that every single one of them is absolutely committed to improving the lives of carers. And I think we all go forward with that in mind to the next election. I think the complexities of the interactions of benefits is something that we're struggling with, and it's something that, you know, we've seen it in the past where the Scottish Government have made a payment on a particular issue and then it's been clawed back. So the kinship care was one that was put in place, and then it was seen as income from the benefit system, and that's a challenge that we have going ahead. And we want to make sure that when we do introduce the new benefits, when we do introduce top-up allowances, as we have done, that those do not impact on people's benefits as they are negatively. So they're working very, very hard to do that. And while we're in the constitution that we are at the moment, we have to keep that balance going and keep those things in view. To my mind, I think, and what I hear, because everybody's got individual circumstances, everybody has got individual caring responsibilities. You can't, arbitrarily set things like 35 hours without looking at individuals and what the impact is. So I think from my point of view going forward, and as we look at this, hopefully in the next session of the Parliament, that we will be looking at flexibility in all of this. And that's about allowing people to work part of the time without it meaning that they do fall off that cliff edge. And also particularly this study ban, the inability to be a full-time student while being a carer, I think is something that absolutely we have to address. So to me, it's about listening to the carers and building into whatever systems in place that flexibility to actually look at individual circumstances and assess people as individuals and families, and not as arbitrarily in a tick box of what happens, and that will really mean that we've put people's human rights firmly into the support and the help that can be offered.
Thank you very much, Claire. And can I bring in Donald?
Thank you very much. I think, as others have said, there really is a lot of consensus around this issue, and I don't think you'll find us, disputing very much at all during the course of this hustings, and that's a really good thing, because there's plenty of other areas where that does happen. I think everyone acknowledges that carers allowance has to be improved, and I think there is, a compelling case for a review of how it's working. Unpaid carers are the backbone of the care system, in my view, given the amount of carers that now, unpaid carers there are in Scotland, over 1 million. And they're not recognised nearly enough. People have talked about the Feely review, the care review. And although that concentrated a lot on social care provided in institutions and in care homes, etc., they did make I think a really helpful contribution to the debate around unpaid carers, because they saw the immense contribution unpaid carers meant made to the system, and accepted that they are undervalued. And should be given more support, more recognition, and more resources. And I think that hopefully one of the things that we can do as candidates, and if we're elected as politicians, is to ensure that unpaid carers are not forgotten when it comes to implementing the Feely review. I mean, I think just to finish, there are 3 or 4 areas, and some Claire's touched on one already, that I think are really need looked at within the carers allowance. The first is the one Claire mentioned about the problem about being in full-time education and being unable to claim. and I think that has to be considered again. I think there's issues around bereavement leave after the person that someone has cared for sadly dies, and how much bereavement leave is then provided. I think we have to look at that again. Mark mentioned the taper, the fact that if you earn just £1 over the £128 limit, then you lose 100% of the allowance. And I think that's another area that we have to look at really carefully. And lastly, to think about eligibility in general, I think the question began with an issue about elder carers, and I think we have to have a proper think about who should be eligible, given the huge expansion in the numbers of people are now acting as unpaid carers, and I think there are very good grounds to look at eligibility in general. Thank you, Fiona.
Thank you very much, Donald. And can you bring Catriona now?
Yeah, thank you very much. I was going to start actually with the issue around older carers, because I think it comes back to the point that was made earlier about whether people identify themselves as carers. And I think that amongst a lot of older people, they perhaps don't. As an example, my 83-year-old father is essentially a carer for my 80-year-old mother who has mental health difficulties. But if you asked him, he would not say he was a carer at all. So I think it's also making sure that people are aware that when they take on caring responsibilities, that there are services out there to support and help them. And I think particularly as we've got an ageing population, and there will be more older people who are going to be unpaid carers, that we need to ensure that we provide that support. And some of the support that's required is because the eligibility criteria within the social care system is so high. And certainly the Feely report advised that should be reduced considerably, so that more people have actual access to the social care services, which currently the gap is being filled by unpaid carers. And I think that's something, again, I think cross-party, there's a lot of consensus around that. And also, again, abolishing a lot of the charges which surround paid care, so that people feel that they can access them and don't have to fill the gap with unpaid care, because they can get services that they should be entitled to, but perhaps don't wish to pay for or can't afford to pay for it. So I think there are a lot of issues around that. Going on to the carers allowance, as I said at the beginning, our leader Ed Davey has pledged to increase the carers allowance by £1,000 per annum, and that's a significant uplift. Although clearly, there's a lot of people who don't actually receive the carers allowance because of all the difficulties around that. So it does need significant reform. And I think that, social care and unpaid care really needs to get on a parity with physical care and with the NHS. And I think, once we go down that road, and if we take up some of the recommendations within the Feely report around that, I think that will have an effect which will help the unpaid caring sector as well as the social care sector.
Thank you very much, Catriona. So I'm going to bring in Clare Cairns again for our next question.
Hi, and our next question is from a carer who's here today. It's Morag Davidson, and she's got a question about caring for more than one person.
Hi, I currently, I'm a 24/7 carer. I have 6 children with complex needs. I have 2 of those children are actually home educated, which is why I'm a 24/7 carer. I don't really get respite. Haven't had any during the pandemic, and I feel like there isn't enough recognition of maybe how many people that you care for. I understand the idea that 30 hours a week is your caring role, but I'm not doing that for 30 hours with two children with complex needs that need 24/7 care. They both need very different care, sometimes at the same time, sometimes one and then the other. And I'm kind of aware that at the moment, when you apply to be, or when you claim carers allowance, you have to specify who you care for, and then anything else you might be entitled to is connected to that. And there's no recognition for the additional people that you care for. So I was just wondering whether or not there are any plans to have like an additional top-up payment or other help, recognition, respite services to recognise that the additional burden of caring for more than one person.
Thank you very much, Morag. Can I bring in Alison first?
Yeah, certainly, Morag, and that is incredible responsibility that you have there. Thank you for all that you're doing. Yeah, it's just incredible. I know that you have, 2 children who are home educated. You're caring 24/7. Yeah, and I noticed, other contributions in the chat, people saying, unlike in normal work, you're just always at work. You're always on call. You're always doing something. I personally believe, and my colleagues in the Scottish Green Party do, and we have raised this previously, that we have to look at the fact that some people are caring for more than one person. I mean, it just seems abundantly clear that if you're looking after 6 people, that is harder work than looking after one person. However much you might want to protest, it's simply more expensive. It's more difficult for you to have respite for that in terms of having people step in. It's more expensive in terms of just providing for the people that you're looking after. I think we have to get serious too when we're having this discussion about making sure that we're doing all we can to care for the carers. I think that we should ensure that when you need a GP appointment, for example, that happens at a time that's convenient for you. Also, as part of our manifesto, we want to see minimum 15-minute appointments so that you've actually got, a bit of time to discuss any issues that might be affecting you. But the heart of your question there is, should you be recognised, should there be financial recognition of the fact that you have more responsibility because you're caring for 6 people than one? Absolutely. I think we should look at the number, and that should be, it should be rewarded commensurate with the number of people that you're looking after. I think that would be wholly reasonable, and I find it quite hard to see why anyone would argue against that, because clearly there are greater costs, there are greater responsibilities here.
Thank you very much, Alison. And can I bring in Clare?
Thank you, and again, a second thanks for everything that you're doing, and how much time that must take up and how much effort that must take up is incredible. But absolutely agree with Alison, and this comes back to my point about flexibility and looking at the individual in this, rather than an arbitrary decision about something. So obviously, if you've got more than one person to care for, then your time will have to be split in some way, and it should be the caring role that's assessed on time, not the care for a particular person. So I absolutely agree that's something that we definitely have to look at going forward. And it also comes back to the right that was enshrined in the Carers Act, that means that you have a right to a carer's assessment from the local authority, and the support that's put in place following that should be appropriate. I think we have to ensure that local authorities and third sector organisations and organisations like who may be involved, like CHAS and these organisations, that they're fully aware of your situation, and they're not looking at respite for one of your children and not the whole family, because this obviously is about the whole well-being of the whole family, not just yourself as a carer or your children. So I think it comes back to that flexibility and ensuring that those rights that have been established are being fully cognizant of the complexities of people's situations.
Thank you very much, Claire. And can I bring in Donald?
Thank you very much for the question, and like others, I'm in awe of what you do every day, and what the pressure that you must be under. And I think it's one of the issues that is plainly contentious with the carers allowances. It doesn't recognise that if you care for more than one person, you don't get paid any extra. And as I said in my previous answer, I think there are lots of areas in which the carers allowance can be improved. And I think a bit like Claire, I think flexibility is key, because every carer on this call will be in a different situation. in terms of the people they look after, in terms of how many people they look after, the age of the people they look after, whether they're working full time or part time. Every carer is in a unique situation, and I think somehow we must make this system recognise that and take into account the circumstances of everyone, and how different they are. And also make the system less bureaucratic. It is very difficult to navigate this, the system around the carers allowance. And I think that's a point that Feely Review made actually, which is that whether it's actually accessing care or the people that work in the care system, we must create a less bureaucratic and an easier system that works for the carers and those that they care for.
Thank you very much, Dodd. And can I bring in Catriona?
Thank you, and thanks very much for your question, Morag. It sounds as though you have got a lot of strength there in order to take on all the caring roles that you do, and I'm sure we're offering our appreciation, but I'm sure your family appreciate it very greatly, and if they don't always show it, then they should do, because you're obviously a very hardworking and caring person. I think it just makes common sense that if you have extra caring responsibilities in terms of the number of people that you care for, that should be reflected within the carers allowance. So I think it is something that needs looked at. I think again, how you are able to access other support. You were mentioning that 2 of your children are home educated, and whether you get sufficient support from the local education authority to assist you with that is something that I think needs to be examined, and to make sure that we're looking after the rights of each one of those children that you have and that you're looking after, and making sure that they're supported in such a way that it then allows you to have respite and to be able to access any support which you should be getting, which perhaps you're providing unpaid care for, when in fact that should be provided for by social services or by the local council. So I think, yes, that the carers allowance should reflect your responsibilities in full, but I hope that you also have access to all of the other services and support that you need, and that should be made more accessible and less bureaucratic, as I think some of the other panelists have mentioned.
Thank you very much. Can I bring in?
Thanks. I think I'll just start off by saying, I think it is of households in poverty. I think half of households in poverty in Scotland have a disabled member of that family, and that's a huge indicator of what are pushing households into poverty, the extra costs of disability, the impact of caring on a disabled person when it comes to employment and career. And I think that's something we really need to look at seriously. We've been speaking about introducing a disability poverty target, where we would set clear targets and goals in the next Parliament to reduce disability, the number of disabled people living in poverty. And some of the things that we do to lift disabled people out of poverty would be introducing a guaranteed minimum income standards, looking at the Scottish child payment that the Scottish Government have just introduced, and introducing an extra supplement, an extra payment for every disabled child in a household, looking at carers allowance, because clearly if you're caring for more than one person, you're going to be committing a huge amount of time to caring for those people. It would be practically impossible to work and have any other income, earned income coming into your household. I think there are a whole range of things that we need to look at to reduce the disability poverty as a whole, and some of those things that I've set out would be how we would start to do that, but by no means a definitive list.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I should bring Clare back in, Clare Cairns, with the next question.
Hi, thank you. I think we're going to try and do 2 questions at once because we are starting to run out of time. The first one, I'm going to bring in Suzanne Monday with a question on supporting the carer gypsy traveller community. And then we'll go directly to Kelly Temple from Oxfam with a question on a national outcome for carers. So I'm going to start with Suzanne, if you could come in with your question, please.
Thanks, Claire. Can you hear me?
Yep, thanks, Suzanne.
Yep. Perfect. So we have a specific question regarding carers within the gypsy traveller community, and you'll be aware that many carers from not just the gypsy traveller community but other minority ethnic groups have great difficulty in accessing existing supports and services. So our question basically is that given the financial pressures that local authorities will be under post-pandemic and going into renewal, what will you do to ensure that carers get access to the support that they require themselves, and also in particular carers within these equality groups?
And now, Kelly, if you could please come in with your question, thanks.
Thank you. So it's Kelly Temple from Oxfam, Scotland, and I've also been an unpaid carer in the past. So part of the recommendations from the Adult Social Care Review focus on placing increased accountability on the Scottish Government. And I know very much that it's only often that which gets measured and is required to be reported on, which really is focused on in terms of the work that gets done or what gets provided. So what Oxfam would like to see is a specific national outcome on care within the 11 national outcomes in the Scottish Government's National Performance Framework. So currently there is no outcome on care or unpaid care, and none of the indicators specifically protect or even mention those who provide unpaid care. We think this is a glaring omission. Would your party support the introduction of a national outcome on care so that the Scottish Government is truly accountable to carers?
Thank you very much. So a couple of meaty questions there. So can I bring in Clare first?
Thank you. If I could just address Suzanne, first of all, I think we know the health inequalities experienced with the gypsy traveller community are very large, and that it's been a recognised and existing problem for a long time. And the fact that in the last session of the Parliament we had an Equalities Minister, particularly for the first time established as a ministerial role, whose duty is to look across all portfolios to ensure that equalities issues are being met, I think has been quite successful. And I know that within that portfolio, the Minister, Catriona, has done a lot to try and tackle the issues facing gypsy travellers. So this is just an extension of those problems that we have looked at in the past. But it's absolutely clear that the Carers Act gives a responsibility for the local authority to live up to the expectations of that Act in terms of a carers plan, a carers assessment, and delivery of support, and as well as we already talked about discriminatory practice, that should be available and should be accessible to everyone in the community, and that would obviously include gypsy traveller communities. So it would be my hope that the expectation that the work of the Equalities Minister will continue in the next session of the Parliament, and that these issues will continue to be a priority that's looked at across all government services, health, education, and all of these areas. And I hope that gives you a little bit of reassurance about that. In terms of the National Performance Framework, I'm not sure that that's going to be a commitment in the manifesto. I haven't seen the SNP manifesto yet. It's still to be published. However, I would say that there has been a lot of recognition within the government of the role of carers, from the introduction of the Carers Act right through to the work that we have done in supporting young carers in particular. And I have to say it's been a real disappointment not to be. I attended the virtual conference but festival this year. Real disappointment not to be able to engage with young people. Is a festival that I've attended on many times as an elected member, and it's really important. So I think in terms of the national framework, I can understand the ask, but from my point of view and the work that I'll do going forward is that in all of these things, people shouldn't be excluded from what's been put in place in terms of all the outcomes, and they should apply equally to carers and equally to people in the community that may be suffering any kind of inequality or discrimination. So so I can't make a particular promise, but I absolutely promise that the outcomes for carers and young carers are absolutely key to what we're doing forward in policy decisions, and we'll continue to do that in the next session of the Parliament.
Thank you very much, Claire. And can I bring in Donald now?
Thank you for that. There's two really important questions. Suzanne, your question first. I don't think anyone on this panel would disagree with the fact that there should be no discrimination in terms of any community or any body of people who, whether they're defined by their ethnicity or their age, whatever it might be. There should be no discrimination about reaching these people. And we just have to redouble our efforts to ensure that happens, particularly amongst the Gypsy traveller community. Quite interestingly, although it's a different subject, the vaccination programme that we've seen over the last few months likewise experienced difficulties in terms of reaching certain ethnic minorities for all sorts of reasons I don't need to go into, but there is clearly an issue when it comes to reaching certain communities, in terms of providing health and social care services to them, and there is no excuse for that. And as I say, we just have to ensure that councils have the funding available, fair funding for full councils available to let us reach these communities and provide, carers within these communities the services that they need and deserve, so that they can carry out their caring services to the people they look after. On the question of the second question, the national performance framework, my own view is that the criteria and the factors that are taken into account there should be under constant review. And if the pandemic has taught us anything over the last 12 months, it is the importance of our care services, whether that's social care provided in care homes or unpaid care. And we've seen and we've talked about how we've just witnessed a huge expansion of the number of people providing unpaid care as a result of the pandemic. And I think that provides a very good reason to look again at the national performance framework and put under serious consideration whether care should be a factor that comes into play. Because I think, as I say, if COVID has taught us anything, it is the importance of people who provide care to loved ones, to family members, or to friends. Thanks.
Yeah. And can I bring in Catriona, please?
Thank you very much. I think in relation to Suzanne's question, there is a difficulty in terms of reaching out to ethnic minorities, but as you'll be aware, it's particularly acute in the Gypsy and traveller community because of the very nature of how they travel around to different places, and then they have to re-access the services that perhaps they managed to get access to in a different part of the country. So it's a particular challenge. I think it again comes back to making sure that our care services are forward-facing, that they're responsive, and that where we know there are difficulties in relation to reaching out to particular groups, that we make a particular effort to do that. And a lot of the councils throughout the country will have equalities officers, and in some instances they have particular officers that look after the Gypsy and traveller community, and it's also ensuring that they have the tools to be able to advise the Gypsy and traveller community where they can access the services, and again allowing them to identify who the carers are within that community, because it comes back to what I was saying about older people sometimes don't identify that they're carers, and again that's the same situation sometimes in the ethnic minority communities. So I think it's really important that we make that extra effort to ensure that we engage properly with Gypsy and traveller communities in all aspects of their needs, but this one in particular. In relation to the national performance framework, again, it's vital that when we're considering how we look at the performance framework and we look at outcomes, that it's not a tick box exercise, that we make sure that if we're going to ensure that there's care outcomes within that framework, that they're actually meaningful and that they reflect what carers want to see put into the framework rather than necessarily what government would like to see. So I think it's a question of having the debate with Oxfam and other caring organisations to find out, what is it that they would like to see, what are the targets that they would like to be met, and to make sure that it's not just empty promises from politicians. We've seen, waiting list targets getting missed. We've seen test and trace targets being missed. So it's one thing to set up performance frameworks and targets, and another thing to make sure that there's the resources and the commitment behind that to ensure that it's delivered.
Thank you very much, Catriona. And can bring in Mark now.
Thanks. First on hard to reach groups, and particularly Gypsy Traveller community. I've got a real issue, and I've spent a lot of time in the last 10 years in Parliament promoting rights of deaf-blind people who use BSL, and constantly in discussion with public bodies about how they reach them, and actually how they reach them is communicating with BSL users in their own language and becoming trusted amongst that community. And that's a similar example that applies to all communities, that public bodies should have dedicated staff members who go into the hard to reach communities, whether that's BME, Gypsy Traveller, deaf, hard of hearing or blind communities, and actually do the proactive work to get to know people, to talk to them in a language that they understand and become trusted. Because to be frank, that is a big part of the issue with access to public service for a lot of these communities, is a lack of trust of public bodies. And until you start building the relationships and building the trust, people are never going to come to access the services that they actually will deserve and will really depend on. So that's got to be the first step, proactively going out into these communities and building trust, and that's what should happen as a matter of course. On the national performance framework, I need to go and take a look at that. I mean, I've worked with carers organisations on FOI and local authorities, putting in parliamentary questions to government about how the Carers Act has been implemented, how many carers assessment, how many carers statements have been completed, and it is very, very patchy right across the whole country. So I think it is something that should be given consideration. My only answer just now is I don't know yet, but I promise I will go away and look at that and give that serious consideration.
Thank you, Mark. And I can pass over to Alison.
Yeah, thank you, Suzanne. I think there's probably agreement here that the Gypsy Traveller community have suffered, well, in my lifetime, the discrimination just continues to go on, and misinformation, misunderstanding. And I think what we all want to see as we move out of the pandemic is that we find ourselves in a better position than where we went in. And, we've even heard Boris Johnstone talking about building back better. Now, whether or not that comes to pass remains to be seen, but my own party are committed to a fair and green recovery, and that means we need to make sure that all voices are heard and that we don't go back to ingrained practices that just continue to enable discrimination and lack of services or unfair delivery of those services. So regardless of where you live and whether or not you live in one area at one point in time, in another area at another point in time, you should be able to access the support that you need. And given, there's been considerable discussion there, and I think that's right, about building up relationships and trust. But I'd like to think that even if you are, a community who does move, that there could be some developing of records that enable people to understand what your circumstances are, so you're not constantly repeating yourself, and so that the help that you require is in place when you arrive at any destination. yeah, Kelly, on the outcomes, I think that's a point well made. We do tend to focus on things that we're measuring. I mean, we're always discussing and debating targets and so on. And we often hear about how much cash is going into things, but clearly it's incredibly important that we understand whether that's made any difference or not. You know, what did that enable? And if it hasn't enabled more positive outcomes for those involved in the incredibly important work of care, then it is a failure. So, as I say, our manifesto isn't published yet, and whether this is in the manifesto or not, I'd certainly be very interested in a national performance outcome on care, given that it affects so many people across the country. I mean, is there anyone that it doesn't affect? And I think it's clear from this discussion and others that this is an area that requires more focus. And I think, a national performance outcome would certainly help focus minds, because, outcomes really are what matters here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. I think we could probably ask questions all day, but we're starting to run out of time. So I'm very briefly going to bring Clare Cairns in just to bring out a couple of themes that have come through the chat before we give you your couple of minutes each at the end.
Thanks, Fiona. I just wanted to say the chat's been really active today and lots of questions. So just apologies to all the people who've asked questions and we haven't had time to ask them to the panel. There've been on themes like charging. There's been questions around young carers, around employability, mental health support, short breaks, a lot of questions around the recommendations in the review of adult social care, including the National Care Service, and also support coming out of the pandemic. So as you can see, a really broad range of questions, and apologies to those who asked that we didn't manage to get to them.
Thank you very much, Clare. So at this point, I'd like to thank the candidates for answering all the questions today. And then this is your closing 2 minutes. So I'd like to hand over to Alison first.
Thanks very much, Fiona, and thanks to all. And I think we could learn a great deal. I'm going to try and make sure I've got access to all the questions and comments that have come in, because those who are, living care every day have got a lot to teach. Those of us who hope to be re-elected to the Scottish Parliament, I'm determined that we see the introduction of a doubled Young Carers Grant. I think our young people we've all had a very, very difficult and challenging year or so, but I think our young people have, just handled it incredibly well. They've continued to care for others while engaging in studies and so on, and it's been a remarkably difficult time for them, and I think that is the least they deserve. I also want to see a renewed focus, and I know there's support from other parties here too, on the introduction of a universal basic income that basically ensures that the social security net is there for everyone and enables people to undertake caring duties and study and so on, and just have a better safety net for the pursuit of more opportunities. I mean, our care system is in crisis. We need to look at the amount that we're paying carers. We need to look at more flexible payments that reflect adequately the numbers of hours of care. You shouldn't have to do 35 hours on top of a week of studying and so on. It's simply it's just simply not supportable at this point in time. We need flexibility. We need a humane system that adequately responds to the fact that you are providing billions of pounds of care to society. It's enabling society to function in a way that it simply couldn't without you. The alternatives are, well, the alternatives would be incredibly expensive, and I don't actually think they would be as beneficial. So we need to support carers to do what they do so well. We need to make sure that all devolved payments rise annually, as I've said, and that they're fit for purpose. We can't go on expecting people to survive on the current amounts that we're asking them to. I want to see a carers recognition payment introduced for all those who are suffering at the moment because they're told you're not entitled to X because you're already benefiting from Y. And we need to ensure that siblings, who are looking after a person.
Alison. Sorry. As I said, I've been quite strict, so I'll turn over to Mark now.
Thanks, Fiona, and thanks to everyone who's had a role in organising the event and everyone who's come along to hear us talk and to ask questions. I hope that I've been able to set out a flavour of what the Scottish Labour Party will be offering in the election, and our manifesto will be out very soon. There's a lot to say about how we would plan to support carers in that manifesto, and also plan on publishing a dedicated manifesto for carers in the coming days too. So hopefully everyone will be able to see that. What it says in our briefing for today is to say one thing that we would commit to doing if we're re-elected, and aside from all the kind of party political pledges, what I would pledge to do if re-elected is not just to be here for your hustings, but to be there for the next 5 years. I'm the co-convener of the cross-party group on carers, and I work very closely with SNP, MSP, and Tom Arthur, and I hope to continue to do that in the next session, to be able to advocate for carers to be there to take on board whatever concerns you have and raise them for raise them with government on a cross-party basis. So that is my commitment to you the next 5 years, to be essentially not just to be here this afternoon, but to be a voice for carers for the next 5 years.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I'd like to pass over to Catriona now.
Thank you very much, Fiona, and thank you to yourself and also to all the questioners, and indeed to the other panelists, for what I think has been a really informative and lively debate. I've done quite a few hustings now, and I don't think I've ever seen such an active chat. It's really hard to kind of keep pace with it, and I do hope that hopefully we can be sent that chat, because there are obviously just so many issues within the care system and for carers that we absolutely must address. You know, as politicians, but also that's because, you know, many of us are also carers or no carers, and we know the value of the work that you do, and anything that we can do to make it easier, to make it more effective, and to support particularly issues around respite and mental health of carers, which we haven't really touched on enough, I think, in the hustings, but, you know, those are absolutely vital. I suppose, again, you know, the one thing that we would do in the Scottish Liberal Democrats is to increase the carers allowance by the £1,000 per year. And I think importantly, the other thing that we are determined to do is to make sure that we put the recovery first, so that we can concentrate on areas like improving mental health, improving services for carers, improving social care, you know, rather than getting distracted with constitutional debates. You know, we really just want to focus on what matters to the people of Scotland in their daily lives, and that's what we would pledge to do if we are successful in the election, and indeed if we work with other parties after the election.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to hand over to Donald now.
Sorry, thank you. Well, firstly, can I just thank everyone for their questions and for their time today. And if you would like to direct a question to me, then I'm more than happy to provide my details to Fiona and Clare after this event. As others said, there is actually a strong political consensus around care. That's quite unusual in today's Scottish politics, and I think it should be built upon. But this hustings has been, you know, really helpful to me to learn of issues, specific issues. You know, we talked about the carers allowance, young challenges around respite services. I think we all accept the pandemic has changed a lot. It's shone a light on stresses in the system that existed already. I think we've talked a lot about the need for flexibility in the system. I think that's for me is one of the sort of takeaways from this discussion. I'm sad we didn't get onto the Feely review. There's a lot to talk about in there. Some aspects, especially kind of national standards, we support. We are worried about other aspects of it, especially if we lose a local approach to care, and there are dangers of centralising care. I'm sad we didn't really talk about young carers more than we were able to. One of the most moving experiences of my time as an MSP was listening to the challenges faced by young carers, some of whom were still at school. They were juggling their caring responsibilities with other parts of their life. They're, you know, trying to work part-time, their leisure, their schooling. And I think that's a really important aspect of of the next 5 years of trying to support people, allowing them to do their caring, but at the same time, school, work, and also, have time to have leisure. We as a party are committed to supporting our carers. We've got a record of doing so in the past. We hope to do so in the next Parliament, and of course, we would work with other parties to do that. We believe that this represents an important step forward, and we need to give carers our stability. We strongly value everyone in Scotland who cares. And
minutes now, Donald. Thank you. And can I just bring in Clare now? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I want to thank everyone as well for organising today, and just to reassure Donald that his colleague Jeremy was on the Young Carers panel last week, so where we listened to some of the specific concerns of young carers. Just to reiterate, I think the Scottish Government have done quite a lot. There's always more to do, and that's not an indication that we don't recognise that there's more that can be done. And I think the Carers Act and the Young Carers Grant and the fact that we're going to be paying again a double payment of carers allowance in the last year to recognise some of the challenges of COVID has also been welcomed. But for the future, and I do really hope to be working with my colleagues again that are seeking re-selection in the panel today, I think it is an area that we can have a good consensus on going forward, and we all recognise the importance. But there's two key areas of opportunity, and that's the introduction of the assistance payment, carers assessment payment, and the development of the National Care Service, both of which will be absolutely pivotal in getting policy in place that will meet the needs of carers going forward. And I think we've got opportunities there to really make a difference in the next session of the Parliament's just of those two issues. And one of the things the government has committed to is to invest in local centres, and that's all about improving understanding of carers, improving and trying to reach out to those who don't necessarily identify themselves as carers at this point, to ensure that they all get the support that they need. Just to finish with them, I know Mark will recognise this too, as someone from North Lanarkshire. North Lanarkshire Carers Together are a fantastic organisation. They would in normal times have at least one yearly conference reaching out to carers in the area and doing so much to inform people about it. And I hope that those kind of good practices can be replicated going forward.
Thank you very much, Claire. I let that one go slightly because you were complimenting an excellent carer centre. So I want to just to say quickly, the video of this event will be on YouTube, and we will be saving the chat so we can have that discussion with the candidates, so that they have all of the comments that you made today, and the video will be uploaded as well as on social media, so we'll get the information out to you. Remember, you can still contact your candidates through our Action for Carers, and our manifesto is available to download, and they're all on the Carers Scotland website. So thank you to Alison, Mark, Catriona, Donald and Claire. We really appreciate you taking the time to take part, and I want to thank all of the carers for attending today. So thank you all, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. That was great. Can we stop sharing the screen and we can see if anybody's stayed behind?
Let's see if I can. I think we're just closing down now. Good.
So is Edward okay to save the chat? Because once you leave, it's gone.
Yes, that's what I was waiting for. Just waiting for us to we can save the chat.
Will you email that on to us, or should we save it?
Yeah, we can get that sent on to you.
That's great.
And we'll send you the link as well for the uploaded video.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much. That all went smoothly technologically and
just about got there. But thank you very much.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
How many people are still there? There's still like 50.
Have we got 580 pounds coins?
Nope, sorry.
Oh, the recording stopped.
No, is it stopped now?